Well, it's been fantastic over the last 12 or more months to catch up with our friends from Crime Stoppers Victoria. We have a new chum along with us today, Brad Swain. Brad, great to meat you. Thanks for your time.
My pleasure, and nice to have a chat to you today.
It's a very serious topic that we're talking about, an illicit drug campaign that you've just launched.
Yeah, that's right. So illicit drugs in Australia have an impact on almost every family. So we know that 1 in 10 people across the country have been a victim of an illicit drug-related incident, or indirectly, through the significant health and social costs to the community. It's a major issue, and so Crime Stoppers have launched a campaign in collaboration with the federal government and law enforcement across Australia to try and encourage people to come forward who have information about this illegal trade of drugs, the importation, the storage, the transport, indeed the sale of illicit drugs throughout Australia.
And it's kind of got an interesting tagline, Brad.
Yeah, they'll never know. So really playing on the anonymity that people who report to Crime Stoppers can choose to have. So that is, when people call us up on 1-800-333-000 or indeed online, there is the capacity to remain completely anonymous. So there are not IP addresses stored, the phone conversations are not recorded. So people who have information can provide that to Crime Stoppers, and that information can then potentially be part of the intelligence that police can use to have an impact on the illicit drugs industry throughout Australia.
Often when we hear about crimes being committed, we kind of hear about a link to drugs. So in terms of people's safety, how important is that to make sure that, the anonymity is kept and people's information is not going to see them get into any sort of physical issues or challenges as far as, drug dealers go?
Oh, it's so important, Peter, and that's why the majority of our advertising for this particular campaign across the country will be done in relatively private moments. So we're looking for people to consider what information they may have about the drug trade in Australia and to potentially report that to Crime Stoppers in private. So we've got some information on our website, crimestoppers.com.au, that assists with the clearing of any caches or web browsing history. And also, we think the most critical part of all of this is that people who report to Crime Stoppers can remain anonymous. So that's not just creating a safe private moment for yourself to jump on a phone or a laptop and report the information you may know, or make a phone call in private and report information you may know. But in no way can investigators ever follow up with you if you choose to remain anonymous. And indeed, there is no capacity for you to ever be part of any of the proceedings that might occur when those criminals do get arrested down the track.
That's a very good thing to know. Brad, we've learned over the time that we've been speaking to people from Crime Stoppers Victoria that lots of little bits of information can really add up to make a big difference. So what sort of things can people be looking out for that for you is going to be like a telltale sign, but we might not think, it's not that big a deal, but maybe it's worth reporting?
No, absolutely, Peter. So what we understand is that the suspicious activity that we're looking for can be wide and varied, and sometimes it can be in plain sight. So, for example, we know that drugs can at times be dropped to places that don't quite make sense. So, for example, number 10 Smith Street might have the Smith family living at it, or it might be a business, Smithville Incorporated. If a package or a parcel regularly turns up on the doorstep of that particular address, but it's addressed to a Mr. Jones, then something may not be quite right about that. So it could be that they're using that particular address as a drop-off point for illicit drugs, and that's information that could assist police and other authorities to understand particular rackets of drugs and their transportation and sale throughout Australia. Another one is when there's a frequent visitation to a workplace or a residence or a disused light industrial factory or something of that nature at all hours of the day or night, and only for very short periods of time. and potentially, if there's any visibility at all on cash and large quantities of cash, then that could well be a sign. So I think people might recognise some of these things at the bottom of their street or in the areas that they frequent. There's no doubt that this activity sometimes does happen in plain sight. Sometimes we're hearing that the illicit drug industry does turn up at people's workplace. So it might be that a workmate or indeed a customer has attempted to request or ask of you to do something that just doesn't quite add up. It's a little bit suspicious. It's unorthodox. It's not something that makes sense in the normal operation of your business or your job. And it might just be something that can help the police, if provided through Crime Stoppers, anonymously, to piece together a puzzle that is relatively complex. And as you said, Peter, before, the more small pieces of that puzzle that are provided through Crime Stoppers anonymously, the clearer that picture becomes.
What about as far as the area that you're concentrating in? I'm thinking, metropolitan, rural, smack bang in the middle of the city. What about that sort of angle?
All of the above. So information that we have from the police suggests that the illicit drug industry has an impact right across Australia. Now, we understand that some of that impact is imported to Australia. So we know that there are some criminal syndicates out of all parts of the world that are trafficking drugs into Australia and then transporting them around Australia to get them to market. There doesn't appear to be any discrimination in terms of towns, rural areas, cities, suburbs, inner or outer. If there's a market for these illicit drugs, then the industry, the illicit drug industry, which is quite sophisticated, does have capacity to move these drugs to where they want to be to make these ill-gotten gains. And at the misery of the community, and we all know the impact that drugs have on crime and health and safety and our social setting more broadly, of course, the syndicates that are responsible for this sale in no way take responsibility for those actions.
Lucrative too, Brad, financially?
Yeah, I should think so. We know from some of the statistics provided across the world and indeed within Australia that the industry here does appear to be lucrative for these criminals, which, if you think about it, Australia is a very lucky country and we've got significant affluence and wealth in relative terms compared to some of the rest of the world. And so that makes it quite lucrative for these international and Australian-based crime and organised crime organisations to target the sale of drugs in Australia.
Are you targeting a particular type of drug?
No, we're not with that this particular campaign, Peter, but we are specifically interested in methamphetamine, cocaine, MDMA, heroin. These are the illicit drugs that ASIC suggests through wastewater testing results are prevalent throughout the Australian community. And, these are the drugs that are turning up in, some of the big drug busts that are happening. The police and the federal police and the border force and right across Australia are making an impact. And the point of this campaign is to assist with that impact. And that's by asking the community to come forward with information they have. And as we said before, like the capacity to do that anonymously through Crime Stoppers, particularly online, is something that we believe will assist in those investigations and lead to the dismantling of this organised crime across Australia.
It sounds most worthwhile, Brad. Some people might say, well, what about the cost? There's some pretty good news there as well, I think.
Yeah, well, in terms of the cost of this campaign, Peter, so this campaign led by Crime Stoppers Australia and funded by the Commonwealth or the federal government, the government of Australia, is actually funded by the proceeds of crime. So there's a federal legislation called the Proceeds of Crime Act, whereby, obviously the cash and proceeds collected when there are big busts and big arrests made, that money can then potentially be used for good purpose through the Attorney General's Office of the Federal Government. So that's how this grant came about. It is, if you like, the ill-gotten gains of the criminals being used to fight the next wave of those criminals.
Well, it sounds, as I said, most worthwhile. Good luck with it. Now, if people do want to either find out more or indeed if there's something they think might be able to help out as far as this particular campaign goes, give us a couple of good ways of getting in touch.
Yeah, well, the best way is online. That's where, absolute safe sharing moments and anonymity is available to people who have information as small or as large as that information may be. So crimestoppers.com.au. There's also the capacity to make a phone call from anywhere in Australia on 1-800-333-000, and people can choose to remain anonymous on that phone call as well. As I said before, there are no IP addresses stored. There are no phone calls recorded. If people have information, they have the capacity to share that information, and we'll never know, and the criminals will never know that it was you that came forward and supplied that information.
Brad, great to catch up. Welcome on board. It's great to have you with us, and we look forward to catching up with you on a regular basis. Thanks for your time today.
My pleasure. Thanks, Peter.
That's Bradley Swain. Brad is from Crime Stoppers Victoria with that very important campaign just launched. It'll go for about 6 months, and I'm sure we'll hear and speak more about it in the coming days.
Now you can reserve an Uber ride up to 90 days in advance, which is handy if you and Alex are going to the game tonight. You can reserve an Uber ride for an hour and 30 minutes after the first bounce, because you know that's when Alex will start heckling the opposition, poking at their team's sore spots, jab after jab, until he's turned 50,000 angry fans against you. Reserve that Uber ride and get out while you still can. Reserve now, ride later with Uber Reserve.